Miss Elderkin's Picture by Harriet Beecher Stowe. You see, boys, said Sam Lawson, as we were gathering young wintergreen on a sunny hillside in June. You see, folks don't allers know what their marcies is when they see 'em. Folks is kind of blinded, and when Providence comes along, they don't seem to know how to take it, and they growl and grumble about what turns out the best things ever happened to 'em in their lives. It's like Miss Elderkin's picture. What about Miss Elderkin's picture? Said both of us in one breath. Didn't I never tell you now? Said Sam. Why, I want to know. And we were sure he never had told us, said Sam, as usual, began cleaning the ground as a thorough introduction with statistical expositions. Well, you see, Miss Elderkin, she lives now over to Sherborne in about the handsomest house in Sherborne, a high white house with green blinds and white pillars in front, and she rides out in her own carriage, said Mr. Elderkin. She's a deacon in the church and a colonel in the militia and a selectman and pretty much atop everything that's a-going on in Sherborne. And all come that our picture. What picture? We shout in chorus. Lordy massy, what are just what I'm going to tell you about. But you see, a feller's just got to make a beginning to all things. Miss Elderkin, she thinks she's a great lady nowadays, I suppose, but I remember when she was Mary Brown over here in Old Town, and I used to be waiting on her to sing in school. Mary and I was pretty good friends along in those days. It was pretty considerable, kind of intimate. Fact is, boys, there was times in them days when I thought whether or not I wouldn't take Mary myself, said Sam, his face growing luminous with the pleasing idea of his former masculine attractions and privileges. Yes, he continued, there was a time when folks said I could ahead Mary if I had asked her, and I pretty much think of so myself, but I didn't say nothing. Marriage is allers kind of oversome, and Mary had such a up and down kind of ways I was sort of afraid of. Oh, but lordy massy, boys, you mustn't never tell Hipsy I said so, 'cause she'd be mad enough to bite a shingle nail in two. Not that she gets so very grit by me neither, but then women's backs is allers up if they think anybody else could have had you, whether they want you themselves or not. You see, Mary, she was an old black hoss, John Brown's daughter, and lived up there in that our big brown house by the meeting house, and that he's a red hollowneck in the front yard. Mary was about the handsomest gal that ever went into the singer's seat on Sunday. I tell you, she wasn't none of your milk and sugar gals neither. She was amazing strong built. She was the strongest gal in her arms that I ever see. Why, I've seen Mary take up a barrel of flour and lift it right into the kitchen, and it would just make the pink come onto your cheeks like two roses, but she never seemed to mind it a grain. She had a good strong back of her own, and she was as straight as a poplar, with snapping black eyes, and tell you there was a snap in her tongue too. Nobody never got ahead of Mary. She'd give every fellow as good as he sent, but for all that, she was a great favorite. Mary was one of your briary scratchy gals that seems to catch fellers in horns. She allers fit and flouted her bow, and the more she fit and flouted them, the more she be oughter her. There wasn't a gal in all Old Town that led such a strong old fellers out of her, 'cause you see, she'd now and then throw 'em a good word over her shoulder, and then they'd all fight who should get it, and she'd just laugh to see 'em do it. Why, there's Tom Sawin, he was one of her beaux, and Jim Moss and Ike Bacon, and there was the Boston boy, Tom Beacon. he came up from Cambridge to rusticate with Parson Lothrop. He thought he must have just have his say with Mary. He got pretty well come up with. You see, he thought because he was a Boston born, he was kind of aristocracy, and he's right just to pick and choose among country gals. But the way he come up with by Mary was too funny for anything. Do tell us about it, we said, as Sam made an artful pause, designed to draw forth solicitation. Well, you see, Tom Beacon, he told like Bacon about it, and he told me 'twas this way. You see, there was a quilting up to Miss Captain Broad's, and Tom Beacon, he was there, and he come to goin' home with the gals. Tom, he cut Ike out, and got Mary all to himself, and 'twas a pretty long piece of the walk from Miss Captain's Broad's up past the swamp, and the stone pastures clear up to old Black Hoss John's. Old Tom, he was in high leather, 'cause Mary took him, so that he didn't really know how to behave. And so as they was walking along past Parson Lothrop's apple orchard, Tom thought he'd be being familiar, and he undertook to put his arm around Mary, while if she didn't just take that little fellow from his two shoulders and whirl him over the fence into the orchard quicker in no time. Why, says Tom, the fuss I knew I was lying on my back under the apple trees looking up at the stars. Mary, she just walked over home and said nothing to nobody. It wasn't her way to talk much about things. And if it hadn't been for Tom Beacon himself, nobody need have known nothing about it. Tom was a little fellow, you see, and amazing good-natured, and one of the sort that couldn't keep nothing to himself, and so he let the cat out of the bag himself. Well, there didn't nobody think the worse of Mary. When fellers find a gal, won't take space from no man, and they kind of respect her, and them fellers allers think it had been them, now things have been different. That's just what Jim Moss and Ike Bacon said. They said why Tom Beacon was a fool not to know better how to get along with Mary. They never had no trouble. The fun of it was that Tom Beacon himself was more crazy after her than he was before, and they say it made Mary a right up and down offer, and Mary, she just wouldn't have him. Well, you see, that went again old Black Hoss John's ideas. Old Black Hoss was about as close as a nut, as a contrary, as a pepperidge tree. You ought to seen him. Why, his face was all perfect, crisscross of wrinkles. There wasn't a spot where you could pin down that wasn't a wrinkle. And they used to say that he held on to every cent that went through his fingers till he pinched it into two. You couldn't say his God was his belly, but he had none. No month to know on file. Folks said that he'd starved himself till the moon shined through him. Old Black Hoss was awfully grouty about Mary's refusing Tom Beacon, 'cause there was his houses and lots of land in Boston. A dreadful worldly old critter, Black Hoss was. He was like a rich fool in the gospel. Well, he's dead and gone now, poor critter, and what good has it done all him? It was as the scriptures say, he heapeth up riches, and knoweth not who shall gather them. Mary had a pretty hard row to hoe with old Black Hoss John. He was up early and down late, and kept everything a-going. She made the cheese and made the butter, and between spells she braided herself handsome straw bonnets and fixed up her clothes, and somehow she worked it so when she sold her butter and cheese, as there was something for ribbons and flowers. You know the scripture says, can a maid forget her ornaments? Well, Mary didn't. I remember I used to lead the singing in them days, and Mary said, used to sing counter. So we sat putty near together in the singers' seats, and I used to think Sunday mornings, when she come to meeting, in her white dress and her red cheeks, and her bonnet all tipped off with laylock, that 'twas for all the world just like sunshine to have her come into the singer's seats. Them was the days I didn't improve my privileges, boys, said Sam, sighing deeply. There was time when I'd have spoke. There was a no knowing what might have happened. 'Cause you see, boys, I was better looking in them days than I am now. Now, you mind, boys, when you grow up, if you get to waiting on a nice gal, you're a'most a mind to speak up to her. Don't you go and put it off, 'cause if you do, you may live to repent it. Well, you see, from the time that Bill Elderkin came and took the academy, I could see plain enough that it was time for me to hang up my fiddle. Bill, he used to set the singer's seats too, and he would have it that he sung tenor. He no more sung tenor than a skunk sung blackbird, but he may believe he did, just to get next to Mary in the singer's seats. They used to sit there in the seats a-writing backward and forward to each other, till there tore out all the leaves of the hymn books and all the singing books besides. Well, I never thought that the house of the Lord was just the place to be counted in. I used to get considerable shocked at the way things went on between them. Why, they'd be writing all sermon time, and I've seen them looking at her as though the long prayer in a way that wasn't right, considering they was both professors of religion. And then the fact was, old Black Hoss, John, was to blame for it, 'cause he never let him have no chance to hum. You see, old Black Hoss, he was sought again Elderkin because he was poor. You see, his mother, the old widow Elderkin, she was just about the poorest, peakedest old body over to Sherborne, and went out to day's work. And Bill Elderkin, he was all for books and learning, and old Black Hoss John, he thought it was just shiftlessness. But Mary, thought he was a genius, and she got it thought in her mind that he was going to be president of the United States or some stuff. Well, old Black Hoss, he wasn't none too polite to Mary Beau in general, but when Elderkin used to come to see her, he was snarlier than a saw. He hadn't a good word for him nowadays, and he'd rake up the fire right before his face and eyes, and rattle about fastening up the windows, and tramp up to the bed, call down to the chamber stairs to Mary to go to bed, and was sort of aggravated in every way. All the folks wants to get a gal set on having a man, and there's a way to go to work. Mary had considerable stiff will of her own, and if she didn't care about Tom Beacon before, she hated him now. And if she liked Bill Elderkin before, she was clean gone over to him now. And so she took a going to Wednesday evening lecture, and then Friday evening in a prayer meeting, in the singing school, just as regular as a clock. And so did he, and afterwards they allers walked home the longest way. Fathers may just as well let their gals be courted in the house, peaceable, because if they can't be courted there, they'll find places where they can be. It's just human nature. Well, come fall, Alderkin went to college, up to Brunswick, and then I used to see the letters as regular up to the store every week, coming in from Brunswick. And old Black Hoss, John, he see him too. He got a way of dropping him hot in his coat pocket when he come to the store, and folks used to say that the letters that went to his coat pocket didn't get to Mary. Anyhow, she says to me one day, says she, Sam, you're up round the post office a good deal, says she. I wish, if you see any letters from me, you just bring 'em along. I see right to it. I told her to be sure I would, and so I used to have to carry in a great thick letters every week. Well, I was waiting on Hepsy along with them times, so Mary and I would kind of sympathize. Hepsy was a pretty gal, and I thought it was all best as 'twas anyway. I knew I couldn't get Mary, and I could get Hepsy, and that made all the difference in the world. Well, that next winter, old Black Hoss was took down with rheumatism, and I tell you that if Mary didn't have the time of it, he wasn't nowadays sweet-tempered when he was well, but come to be crooked up with rheumatitis and kept awake nights. It seems as if he was determined there should nobody have no peace so long as he couldn't. He'd get Mary up and down with him night after night. I'm making her feet flannels with vinegar, and then he'd jaw and scold so that she was earnest beat out. He wouldn't have nobody set up with him, though there was offers made. No, he said Mary was his daughter, and 'twas her business to take care of it. Mary was clear worked down. Folks kind of pitied her. She was a strong gal. There were things that wears out the strongest. The worst of it was, it hung on so. Old Black Hoss had an amazing side of constitution. He'd go all the way to death's door and seemed to hardly have the breath of life in him, and then he'd come again. These are folks that nobody wants to have live hours have such a sight of wearing them. They just last and last, and it really did seem as if he'd wear Mary out and get her to the grave first, or she got a cough with being up so much in the cold and grew thin as a shatter. Remember one time I went up there to offer to watch just in the spring of the year when the laylocks was just budding about, and Mary, she come and talked with me over the fence. The poor gal, she fairly broke down and sobbed, as if her heart would break, a-telling me her trouble. Was it really affected me more to have Mary give up so more than most gals? Because she always held her head up, had such a sight of grit and resolution. But she told me about it. It seems old Black Hoss, he wasn't content with worrying on her and getting on her up nights. But he kept hectoring her about Bill Elderkin and wanted her to promise that she wouldn't have Bill when he was dead and gone. But Mary, she wouldn't promise, and when the old man said she should have had a cent from him if she didn't, and she said it back and forth, everybody in town was saying what a shame 'twas he should starve her so, for though he'd have other children, they was married and gone, and there wasn't no one of them to do for him but just Mary. Oh, he hung on till just as the ponies in the front yard and was beginnings to blow out, and then he began to feel he was going, and he sent Parson Lothrop to know what is to be done about his soul. Well, said Parson Lothrop, you must settle up all your worldly affairs. You must be in a place, peace and love with all mankind, and if you've wronged anybody, you must make it good to him. Old Black Hoss, he bounced right over to his bed and back to the minister. The devil, says he, 'twill make all I've got. And he never spoke another word. Through Parson Lothrop, he prayed with him and did what he could for them. Well, that night I sat up with him and went off between 2 or 3 in the morning, and I laid him out regular. Of all the racks of bone I've ever seen, I never see a human critter so poor as he was. 'Twas nothing but his awful will kept his soul in his body so long as it was. We had the funeral in the meeting house this Sunday, and Parson Lothrop, he preached a sermon on contentment in the text. He brought nothing into the world, and it's sartin we carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us there with content. Parson Lothrop, he got round the subject about as handsome as he could. He didn't lay what a skin flint old Black Hoss was, but he talked in a general way about the vanity of worrying and scraping to heaping up riches. You see, Parson Lothrop, he could say it pretty easy too, 'cause since he married a rich wife, he never had no occasion to worry about temporal matters. folks allers preaches better on the vanity of riches when there's tolerable easy circumstances. You see, when folks is pestered and worried to pay their bills and don't know where the next dollar is to come from, it's a great temptation to be kind of valuing riches, maybe envying those that got 'em. Whereas when one's accounts all pays themselves, and the money comes just when he wanted regular, a body feels sort of composed like, and able to take the right views of things, like Parson Lothrop. Well, after sermon, the relations all went over to the old house to hear the will read. And as I was kind of friend with the family, I just slipped in along with the rest. Squire Jones, he had the will, and so when he got sought round all solemn, he broke the seals and unfolded it, cracking it like a good while afore he began. And it was still, you might have heard a pin drop when he began to read. First there was a farm and stock he left to his son John Brown over in Sherborne. Then there was the household stuff and all things, spoons and dishes and beds and kiver lids and so on, and to his daughter Polly Blanchard. And then last of all, he says he left to his daughter Mary the pitcher that was on top of the shelf in the bedroom closet. That was an old cracked pitcher that Mary Allers had hated the sight of, and in spring and fall she used to beg her father to let her throw it away. But no, she wouldn't let her touch it, and so it stood gathering dust. Some of 'em run and handed it down, and it seemed just full of scoring and nothing else. They handed it to Mary. Well, Mary, she was wrathy then. She didn't so much mind being left out of the will, because she expected that. But to have that our old pitcher poked at her at so sort of scornful was more than she could bear. She took it in gin and threw it across the room with all her might, and it hit against the wall and broke into 1,000 bits, when out rolled hundreds of gold pieces. Great gold eagles and guineas flew round the kitchen, just as thick as dandelions in a meadow. I tell you, she scrabbled them up pretty quick, and we all helped her. Come to count him over, Mary had just the best fortin in the whole, as 'twas right proper she was. Mary was a sensible gal, and she invested her money well, and so when Bill Elderkin got through his law studies, he found a wife that could make a nice beginning with him. And that's the way, you see, they came to be doing as well as they be. So boys, you just mind and remember that allers see what there is a providence afore you quarrel with it, 'cause there's a going many things in this world turns out like Miss Elderkin's picture. And that's the end of Miss Elderkin's picture by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I liked it. I'm going to be honest. I have really poor reading comprehension skills, but I guess I understood part of it, but at least half the words I didn't understand what they're saying. And there was like slang, there's like Southern slang, I think. So like I didn't understand what all of it was saying, but I tried to understand it. But it was okay. It was all right. But I thought it was a good story. From what I understood about it, I liked. So I did like a lot of parts of it. So I like reading things and not fully understanding, because my reading comprehension skills are really bad and my memory is really bad. I don't have very good attention to detail, but I think it's healthy to read things even if you don't fully understand them, because you can improve your reading comprehension the more you read. So that's why I read. So I plan on getting better at it the more I do. So that's just what I think. Let me know in the comments below, what did you think of the story. Please subscribe to this channel to be part of the community. And please like this video. It really helps the channel out a lot. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.